Okay, so um, before I begin, before we continue um, with this class definition, with writing it, um, I want to um, I want to I want to um, 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 make some clarifications about what I previously said about the effectiveness of including a constructor lacking any arguments. So I believe what I had said in a previous video um, was that was that that um, that constructors lacking any arguments are at their core ineffective. But um, then now and without any further specifications of what I mean ineffective, right? So of ineffective, um, 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 saying putting that label on or placing that label on constructors would be I guess you could say inappropriate or actually illogical, um, or just or they will the identification as or basically labeling um, con- labeling um, constructors of this form as being as invariably being um, ineffective, right? So in all contexts they would be ineffective. I think that would obviously be wrong, right? Because it's totally because it would be it would be um, it would okay. I'm back. Sorry about that temporary pause. Um, so um, okay. So back to what I was previously saying about default constructors. So basically, yes, not they're not invariably useless, right, or ineffective, right? Because because saying that they have an invariable ineffectiveness would wrongly or incorrectly imply that that in all contexts is like they don't really serve a beneficial or effective purpose, right? So they don't really have any sort of considerable impact toward a program or the difference or the forward steps in the program's progression, right? In solving a programming task, and that's obviously very far from the truth, right? Um, because that's very incorrect and very wrong to imply. So because with default, I think when we talk about the effectiveness of a default constructor's inclusion in a program's definition, it really what it really comes down to is um, is the number of arguments included in in an argument, right? That's really or the number of or it's really I think the effect basically there isn't a universal um, there isn't really a universal um, basically there isn't basically um, there isn't really um, we can't universally we can't say that a that a default constructor's inclusion in a class definition is universally effective or universally not effective or ineffective. It's really dependent upon um, our intentions with the use of the constructor or basically our intentions for um, for the um, for the initialization of variables using a constructor, right? So it really depends on how it really depends on how many constructors we or how many variables we really want to initialize, and this is quite obvious. Um, uh, if you really consider the purpose of a constructor, right? Because it's like imagine if I had included, for example, another parameter in here, and it was an int, I just say int number, and I included that as an additional parameter to this constructor here. Well, that would be very ineffective and very pointless, right? Because the inclusion of this parameter of this additional parameter doesn't really serve a purpose, right? So basically, having two parameters here, that wouldn't be the appropriate that wouldn't two parameters would not be the appropriate number of parameters to include in this constructor, and the reason why is because it's really the amount of the number of arguments that, or the number of parameters that should be included in a constructor really is dependent upon um, what 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 pieces of data we wish to initialize, right? Because that it really comes back to the concept of understanding, or it really comes back to the idea behind the inclusion of parameters at all, um, because parameters are included for the purpose of being used in the initialization of a particular attribution um, to an object, or in an object. Um, and so a parameter is ineffective when it no longer serves the the sole purpose, or the purpose it would have, and it's and it, the one would or the practical purpose, or the logical purpose of its inclusion as a parameter in a constructor, and that would be with that would be it would be to be used in this in an initialization statement, to basically serve as a value that we're setting a data piece of an object data piece um, to. So basically, it's all about if a parameter is relevant, right? So this parameter would not be relevant, and so there would be no point in basically including it, right? Because it's no longer relevant um, because there aren't any matching data pieces that I would want to logically set um, set um, set to, or have there aren't any logical um, or there aren't any data pieces within objects of this class type that would that I would that I would want um, that I would want to have um, set to that particular parameter. And so it really depends on well, it really depends on having a relevant number of parameters, and if zero is a right is a and really in figuring that out, we just have to recognize um, if we have how many parameters would or how many data pieces we have, and recognizing the of for an object, and recognizing if we want to initialize them with a parameter or not, and or when or at which time, and with what do we want to initialize them with, right? So if I have, let's say, if um, I have one parameter here, right? But in all cases, it may not be necessarily it may not necessarily be true that that I would want to initialize that it would be initialized in the constructor here, right? Because practically a user may want to initialize it elsewhere, or not elsewhere, but in a particular time, right? Since the user isn't responsible for data pieces initialization.